Welcome everyone to our conversation on why is there no art at the RSA, and I feel we very much need to include it, as the RSA is a microcosm of society, very much needs to reflect the profound creativity within Britain, still cool Britannia, and the wide-ranging possibility of the arts today. The RSA really needs to take that on. I know in the background it has very many projects. It now needs to bring it into the foreground, into the building, and make it clear and obvious. I have with me a fantastic group of people who will be discussing all of these issues today. So my name is Degard. I'm hosting this event. This is an exhibition that I'm putting on today. So I am the artist of the group. Thank you.
So hello, I'm Jennifer, and I've been a fellow of the RSA for 4 years, and I'm very interested in their fellowship events to do with consciousness and mindfulness. And I see RSA as sort of a bridge between a very sort of intellectual, old school, this is what is valuable type of world, and then into what they term the 21st century enlightenment, which is a lot more spacious and allows other things to be valuable, which are going to lead us into a better future, a more life-giving future. So my work's particularly involved with education and mindsets, and I'm always interested in what the RSA does, and then hence this conversation to just participate even more into that narrative.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I'm Wozzy Brewster. I am the founder and executive director of the MIDI Music Company, which is a music education and artist development charity in Deptford. I'm an artist manager. I'm youth culture advisor to the Mayor of Lewisham. I manage a band called United Vibrations, and I have a love and a passion around young people and creativity, and not just for art's sake, but also in the sense of developing professional careers. So I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with the Noisettes from inception, from 1997 in their first formation, and still advise people like Shingai from the Noisettes, and developed artist careers. We have a BAFTA award winner, Destiny Ekeregwa, and she's done a feature film, and Sir Lenny Henry sought her out to direct his biopic documentary for the BBC. So it's very much about how can I use my contacts to connect young people, and I've only been a member of the RSA for a year, just. And I've had a busy year, so not in there as often as I would like, but I think when I saw your Degard's email and everything, it was about, I come from a very spiritual place, I guess. I'm a practicing healer. I believe that art, visual arts, crafts, singing, poetry is an expression of the soul, has healing powers, and I'm very interested in why there are lots of kind of creative events at the RSA. How do we look at the social and the economic and the 21st century enlightenment? We don't look at new ways of working, and that should be central to an organisation like the RSA. Not that I know a lot about it, having only been there for a year.
Fantastic, thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm Hainsworth. I'm a chartered accountant. My company Rowan Blade works with companies across the creative industries, largely film and video games and virtual reality. Recently I've become involved with a couple of arts-based projects. One of them, We Are From Dust, is about taking art from the Burning Man Festival in the Nevada Desert. It's quite non-traditional art, it's big, it's playful, it's interactive, and I've been learning a lot about the contemporary art world through trying to take that Burning Man art to a wider audience, particularly to places where that kind of art doesn't get typically shown. Through that project, I met a lady called Holly Millian, who's founded an organisation called Artists United, Originally set up in the US, it's now a worldwide organisation that exists to connect artists who are interested in changing society. I connected with her because I was looking, although I'm an accountant, I was looking for some legal and tax advice on structuring our fundraising efforts to support the arts, and it's through that partly through that I connected with Degard, and we actually met at an event that was organised by the RSA. I think it was around public policy and measuring the value of arts in education. And again, that's something I'm particularly interested in as somebody as a finance person, or sometimes as an entrepreneur in my own right in the creative industries, is understanding the value of the arts, the different ways in which art contributes to society, understanding, I guess, as an accountant, how you measure some of those things which are not necessarily capable of being easily measured. And yeah, that's why, although I'm not a member of the RSA, I was really interested to come on today.
Great, thank you very much. I was thinking maybe you'll become a member now.
I don't know, I think you have to be invited, right?
Well, we'll invite you.
My name is Michael Paraksos. I am a writer and art historian, essentially. I've been teaching in universities and art schools for over 25 years now. I'm currently teaching at Imperial College and Sitting Guilds of London Art School. Sitting Guilds of London Art School is a traditional art school. It's one of the few remaining independent art schools in the country. Sitting Guilds is an unusual place to have art and art historian. It's obviously a science, medical, technological institution. So we are slightly not on a limb, but we are an unusual department within the structure. But that, in a way, is sort of the point, really. And it's part of the reason I think I'm here. That Imperial, as an institution, and I myself am interested in the interactions between artists and creative activity by non-artists in an institution like that. And there is institutional support for creative activity, so we have art studios, which people rarely expect at a place like Imperial. We have gallery space. And we have courses which are open to anyone, but many of the students come from within the institution itself, which look at art history, as in my case, but we have creative writing, we have music, we have photography courses. So it's very much the place where art and science, almost the RSA's initials really, what they stand for, arts, science, manufacture, isn't it, and commerce. They all come together really in Imperial College. So it's a kind of melting pot for maybe what we would like to see more of at the RSA itself, not just the social side, not just the commerce side, the manufacturer side, but the art side in there as well. So I think these things are very important, and my background, I hope, dovetails with what we're going to look at.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
I'm Elizabeth Winter, and I'm very new to the RSA. I was invited to join a few months ago, and I decided to do so partly because naively I thought the Royal Society of Arts there will be all sorts of creative things going on, and my work is entirely different. It's in relation to Afghanistan and working with civil society there and supporting the work of NGOs, charities, etc., British and Irish ones that work there. And from day one when I went into the building, I felt a complete lack of the arts. Your point about creative arts being important to the soul, I think is absolutely right. It's certainly important to people in Afghanistan, where music is important, where creative arts generally, poetry in particular. And in a conflict situation, those kind of things become even more, not necessarily healing, but certainly helpful, that you can involve yourself with them. So I would just like to see more of those things. I'd like to see the building look different and be more welcoming, and maybe the arts can assist with that. So when I came to the talk that you gave, I was interested to come back and explore it a bit more, and I think making recommendations to the RSA about it would be good. I'm a little surprised that there aren't more artists here today, but of course it is a hot Sunday, the weekend, so that may be why, and presumably we can have a wider discussion about it once whatever comes out of today can be shown to other people.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Just to answer your point, artists weren't invited, which is why there aren't any. However, we do have about 10,000 waiting, so don't worry.
10,000 waiting.
Artists.
Waiting for.
Well, I'm saying it as a joke in a way. Through artists, I had an earlier talk here with a group of artists, having a conversation about what I'm terming etheric art, which they were very happy to take on that concept, which means art which is devoted, if you like, to an expression of the etheric, which could be defined as the soul, the psyche, but it could also be an energy, a creative energy. It doesn't have to be, that kind of spooky depth type thing. But it's an art created out of a genuine integrity, with those concepts in mind. And there are a few artists who truly work like that. And along with Holly from Artists United, we are starting to collaborate to produce that kind of work and that kind of group. So in terms of artists being involved, I don't think that's an issue. And I think the RSA itself, I think there are a lot of artists who, exactly as you're saying, join because the word art is in the title. And because it doesn't do what it says on the tin, it disenfranchises some people, and I've had some people leave, say they left because exactly for that reason, because there wasn't the creativity involved there. So thank you for that comment, but have no fear. I think I felt this conversation was important to have between fellows. Very interested to hear your sort of non-fellow, but from a finance perspective as well. So I think I'd like to crack off with Dr. Michael's view and your abstract on arts, education. I thought it was really magnificent, actually.
Okay. I'm not going to speak from notes. I thought with a short thing it would be best to keep it very informal and fluid. I will say, just to start, in a curious way, I didn't go into the RSA thinking it was predominantly to do with arts. Historically, I remember the RSA being responsible for secretarial courses, and that's what I always thought of it as. I went in because I was interested in the educational side, and that was how I was nominated through an external examiner for us. Having said that, I agree with you entirely. The building at least could be more artistic to reflect the one surviving initial in that longer title in the RSA. Now, I think, and I wonder at least, whether we could link this to a kind of long, slow retreat of art in the educational life of this country. We seem to have a lot of art around now. A lot of money, national lottery money, has been spent on big institutions, particularly here in London, from Tate Modern through to all the extensions that seem to be on every other cultural institution here. And it looks like art is always on the expansive, but actually when you look both elsewhere in the country and even here in London, it's not actually what's happening. If you go back less than a generation, there were literally hundreds of art schools, independent art schools in this country, up and down every small town every large town had an independent art school which had its own ethos. And gradually they have been closed, merged, or they've become universities, swallowed up by universities, or becoming universities themselves. So that you have a handful of them now. And it seems to me that this is very indicative of a much wider phenomena that we're now seeing is happening in museums. Regional art museums cannot survive in exactly the same way, so we're getting things pared down to their absolute minimum. And just to give you some sort of sense of context, David Haste, former head of Kent's Institute of Art and Design, has written a wonderful book on the art schools just of Kent. And he says that 150 years ago, 200 years ago, there were about 200 art schools that were known in Kent alone. Now, some of them were very small. They had one or two students with one member of staff, or one tutor, an artist tutor. And some of them, inevitably would have finished, when that artist tutor retired or died or whatever. Some of them survived. Canterbury, Maidstone, and others survived. But gradually they've whittled down. So you now have in Kent, I think we're down to 2. So it's a long process of retreat, and it seems to me that's a very damaging phenomenon, because one of the benefits of that plurality, that difference of independent art schools, it is important that they're independent, is that you have multiple voices. Every town has a creative voice. As a student, if you didn't like that voice, you could go to the next town, because sometimes you could go in the same town to a different institution. So plurality actually helped people find their niche, but also it meant that different voices, necessary voices for us to progress as a society, could flourish and could be heard. And it seems to me, you could almost say, you've used the phrase, the RSA is almost like a microcosm of society. You could almost say that's happened in the RSA as well. The RSA, when it was founded, had exhibitions. Great artists were members of it. People like Hogarth, Reynolds, they were members of it, and they had exhibitions. Out of that grows the Royal Society of Arts, and then we have this hiatus that seems to last a long time, when there's very little artistic activity happens until something like the Great Exhibition comes along in 1851, and then that leads to various things being founded, and then we end up in 1951. We have the Great Exhibition. It's involved in that. So there are these periods when you have this flourishing of art in the institution and in the RSA, and then it disappears. And it seems to me we're in this long process in society of retreat from art, and the RSA now has to pick up the gauntlet and actually say it's time to make another bold statement which is equivalent, not the same as, but equivalent to founding of a Royal Academy, staging a great exhibition, staging a festival of Britain, something that actually says art is central to our society, it's important for who we are, and it's also important for our health, our well-being, our social well-being, not just individual well-being. These things are at the heart of what we are as human beings. So I would argue that long, slow retreat is damaging, and the RSA can make a stand. Now, the other thing I would suggest is that one could turn around and say, well, okay, art is still there. You can go to the University of Arts London, you can go to various universities in London and elsewhere, and you can study art. But the university system is fundamentally different to an art school tradition. The art school tradition was, by its very nature, anarchistic. It wasn't about ticking the right boxes. It wasn't about saying, this is equivalent to a degree in medicine, or this is equivalent to a degree in even philosophy or other art subjects, visual arts, which is my specialism. It was a thing in itself, and it had its own values. And what made it special, and what those art schools that have disappeared fostered, was what I characterise as an anarchistic cultural set of values. And what I mean by those is not anarchist rioting or anything like that. What I mean by that is an open-ended approach to questions that we face, both as individuals and as society. It's all very easy to have a system where you say, these are the outcomes, this is what we do to get to those outcomes. But that's not a creative system. But at the heart of the university system, that is what you get. You know what the outcomes are. You know what the learning outcomes are. It says on the document that you have to teach to. That's what they are about. The art school system was about not having those final outcomes. And it seems to me that is central to a healthy society. You don't know what the answer is, because if you knew, then you wouldn't need to ask the question. I mean, it's important that we recognise that, I feel. And so I wouldn't just say it's a matter of sort of the RSA suddenly coming along and, you know, we do some big event like a great exhibition or whatever. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm thinking putting that idea of open-ended inquiry, possibility of finding answers to questions you didn't even know you needed to ask, but also the possibility of failure. You know, we don't know the answer, so maybe the answer we come up with, maybe the conclusions are not relevant, but we give it space, we give our inquiry space to come to that conclusion. So I would say to a future sort of development of this, really, it is a matter of the RSA embracing art in the institutions, in the building, in its thinking, but also embracing that art school method of open-ended questions that may or may not come up with viable answers, but just asking open-ended questions as a way of developing society and coming up with innovative futures, interesting futures, exciting futures. I mean, one of the things I have noticed, primarily through Imperial, which has forced me to sort of confront some of my if you like, my institutional prejudices about the art and science divide, is that some of these ideas are already there outside of art. If you go to a business school, they will quite often teach ideas of creativity. And you look at the documents they're teaching to, frequently, there's a man called Dennis Goya. You could replace every word organisation with the word art school and it would fit in the document he's teaching to. So these things are happening. I think we almost need a kind of focus which the RSA could provide, that says these things are happening and acknowledges that they have an origin in art and artistic inquiry. So that's my sort of informal rant, if you like. That's how I would hope something like this would go. Both there is a physical need to change the space in a sense, but there's also we need to embrace something we are very close to losing in that art school system. There are only one or two of these places now hanging on, and they are so central to our society.
I mean, that connects with, I come from working in the voluntary sector, and even though I run a music company, I worked with the late great John Stevens, and he was an artist and a very infamous jazz drummer, and he would go into like deaf schools and be teaching music. He had a program, Search and Reflect, there's a book, and I think Goldsmiths University that came out of community music, that he would be teaching music, but he would also incorporate art. So as an artist, I think at the time of his death in September 1994, he had an exhibition on at a gallery in Ealing, and he borrowed some huge painting that he'd done of a wonderful saxophonist for me for the Mini Music Company, and he borrowed it to put it in this exhibition. But on my walls in my office and in my building in the Mini Music Company, we have original artwork by John Stevens. And they were influenced by Billie Holiday. The one in Billie Holiday, I was actually at his house when he was doing that piece of work, doing a vocal session with him. But it's about where we are in our educational system, the national curriculum in this country, and what the EBAC, the English Baccalaureate, is doing in terms of excluding arts, activity, art as an industry, a career pathway for children and young people. Yeah. And I think the Minister for Education talked about the fact that she felt that the EBAC would be a lot more advantageous for disadvantaged youth. I say not necessarily. Having been to a very small Church of England school myself, that was all around arts and culture and sports. I sit in my industry now because of that nurturing in my secondary school. I think there's a campaign called Back for the Future, and it's being led by the ISM, and they've got lots of industries behind them to help them with that campaign and raise the profile. And their research is showing from the actual qualification bodies that the take-up for art subjects is down from the stats from 2016. And the government took over a year to produce the report around implementing the EBAC, and failed to recognise that if you are in a private school, you will have every subject available to you. If you are in a state school, if in order to get your Ofsted report, which is what is being reported, that if you want the outstanding and the good report, you are going to be with what they call the STEM subjects, science, technology, English and maths. We are arguing for STEAM, and I think that the Royal Society of Arts has a huge role to play in bringing this to the fore as a conversation, as policy pressure for central government, because the creative industries are what, 8.1 billion and rising, the fastest industries in the country, the industries that have saved the austerity in the economy. So when we went into those recessions, it was the creative industries that thrived. And how important is that for the future of the industries if a diverse representation of children and young people have the opportunity to practice art? And I totally agree with you in terms of the art schools. I work in informal education. I'm not opposed to formal education. My son's in America at the moment on his sports scholarship, and he is doing his sports degree, and I'm supporting him to achieve those. I just like my education in a very different teacup. And I think that we have to have different ways that we all learn, because we all learn in different ways, whether that's a visual learner, aesthetic learner, however it is that you learn. Some people can be lectured at and they absorb that information, and for other people, you know, it's got to come in a different format. They want the child's eyes in order for them to understand. And there's a Californian university that did a lot of research around how we all learn. At the end of the day, to have a more holistic and balanced lifestyle for our young people to come into being adults in this world, arts have to play a key role. Arts have to be central to the science, the technology. It's all part of the innovation. You were talking about transferable skills at the end of the day. They give you that opportunity to either be in the creative industry as your professional, or to take that creativity in the way that you think out of the box to other industries. And whether that's creating new airplanes or new computers, whichever way it is, it's intrinsic in who we are as human beings.
But we have a very narrow definition, don't we, of what transferable skills mean. I mean, it means, when it was introduced and I was first teaching, I mean, what it meant was you taught fine art students how to use Photoshop, and they could then go and use that in business. What it should really mean is the creative way of thinking and creative way of being, and all those aspects of creativity are part of every aspect of your life. You don't just compartmentalise. Now I'm doing my art. Now I'm doing my my business activity. The two should come together in some meaningful way. But it's a kind of it's the issue. I mean, it'd be interesting to get your point on how you measure these things, because in a sense the measurements themselves quite often become the learning outcomes rather than at these neutral observation platforms that you're looking at what's going on. And I think that's where the danger, it's not just the danger, that's what's happened. We are now measured on how many students can use PowerPoint, how they can, rather than whether it's integral to what they're doing. I mean, what do you think on these issues of measuring all of this?
Okay, so the measurement point, I understand the dangers of that. I remember, I think it was a really interesting discussion at the What Next group that I was talking about earlier, where there were a lot of interactions between the cultural world and education. And there was a guy who represented two South London areas, and he was relating the history of current government's education policy and how they were. What was really smart about that particular education minister was that he'd understood that you didn't have to tell teachers what they could teach, you just set the curriculum, measure them according to that, and that's what you were saying earlier. And therefore the targets are used in a really insidious way to define so the measurement drives a real narrowing of the curriculum, and I think that's obviously enormously dangerous, especially when people don't go to a private school and therefore deprived of all of this stuff. So I would share your concern about an obsession with measurement. I think that what really interests me is understanding what those values are. So if we can separate that out from an obsession about measurement, which I will admit is part of my mindset. I'm quite a new labour in that sense, and it kind of helps me a lot. But just intellectually, how we understand the value of the arts and accepting sometimes that we can't necessarily measure that easily.
Soft outcomes, key performance indicators. It all started even before the New Labour, really. It started through the regeneration programmes around about the City Challenge time of 1992. And when they were investing in the City Challenge areas, Deptford was one of those areas, and I was on the board of directors for Deptford City Challenge, and I remember the discussions around the regeneration and obviously having quite a large arts community in Deptford. We have the Albany, and just generally having lots of different people, Irish Dance Theatre. We were trying to ensure that not only, I represent young people, but not only just around young people, but creativity was going to be intrinsic to what that plan of action would be for the next 5 years of development and regeneration in the Deptford area. And it was very successful, and quite a lot of those went on to work for the local authority or start businesses. That was a really good piece of work out of Deptford City Challenge. But the way in which they met it was a different language to us. So I've worked in the arts since 1981, 82. It was a whole new language that we had to learn in order to get this bid through, but also get the authorisation for the programme of regeneration, and incorporating the creative industries, art, into that speak was for me the first part of that journey back in 1992, where all of a sudden we were talking about our creativity in a very different way. I do believe you have to measure, you have to understand what the outcomes of your work are, but I think that it can become a very narrow framework when it's more on numbers and not necessarily on the intrinsic way in which you talked about the art schools. The Conservatoire in Blackheath they do music and they do art. They're one of the long surviving ones in terms of the fact that somebody can go there and just learn about art. It's not sometimes fitting into a box isn't the way, and you can't always predict what those outcomes could be.
Just reminded of something that that RSA workshop which we went to, which was really good. I'm trying to remember the details of it, but
which
we
is
did this.
Just to recap, it was the Bridges connection of the Royal Opera House with an RSA funded project to consider evaluation criteria in schools, and the desire was that the schools that they were approaching would then be more confident to use evaluation criteria. That was
So the bit that I was remembering, so we did these exercises where we were given little bits of paper with all sorts of different assessment things, ranging from more qualitative, quantitative, and interviews and stuff like that, and discussing the pros and cons of all those very different methods of getting evidence. And there was an example about there was the discussion about and there was a discussion about what role artists might play in that, and the observation or realisation of a lot of the people in the room that artists were rarely involved in that, and also a discussion of whether they'd be interested to do that. And then finally the thought that actually they are doing that, but they just don't think of it in those terms. So artists, when they're doing their practice, so going into a school and doing a workshop with kids, and yes, some kind of workshop, and at that point, delivering the workshop and engaging with the kids, they are having all those light bulb moments, those qualitative moments that none of us can necessarily immediately explain, but where they understand there's something transformational that's happened, and that and then when the artists are forced to do or connected with a monitoring framework, then and thinking about evaluating what they've done and looking back a little bit, it kind of all does fit together. The qualitative experience of what the artistic activity can fit into a measurement framework. But the artist never really saw it that way. They just shows what they were doing.
Yes, experience. Yeah. Just to recap a little on what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm slightly off track. What I am hearing from what you're saying, Michael, is that we had this regional variety of voice within the arts, which produced a thriving group of artists from memory in Cornwall. You've got the Euston Road group of artists. You had you had a whole group come out of the Slade with Cecil Collins, and in particular, and also those art schools weren't joined into, is it the Art School of London or London Arts College?
I can give you the history of it, but
it was just there was this, like you say, there was this plurality, and you had I was thinking as you were saying it's just gone out of my mind, the one in North London beginning with H.
What, art school?
Yeah, you had some fantastic art schools with some fantastic sort of leading art minds who then went on to produce, if you're talking about, for me, evaluation criteria is the actual physical outcome.
Yes.
That you've got a whole load of paintings that now are spread all over the world, giving people hope, inspiration, hundreds of hours of writing time, TV programs, analysis, cultural analysis, and a fascination for the world that we live in, and that work sustains through the centuries, as opposed to what we seem to be creating today. So what I'm hearing from at a university level, that not only are we not, so what's starting to happen, so instead of saying you come in as a student, here you go, you have an open sketchbook, and now you, through your own self, need to figure it all out, which was what happened to me. It's extremely painful, I have to say. It's not it's not an easy process. However, I think I would prefer that as opposed to you're going to learn A, B, C, D, and then arrive at a very one-dimensional opinion and have that to sustain yourself through your life.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the issue you're describing there of the pain of it. I mean, yes, it is painful in a sense. But that's where support from your tutors and your peers is so important. The numbers of students within a particular institution, I won't name names, these days on the staff-student ratio is absolutely ridiculous. So of course you don't get that personal attention when you need it. but the principle is sound. That you can't just tell somebody go into that studio and make some art. It doesn't work. You know, that's sink or swim. You need somebody there who acts as a mentor. But that does cost money. There's no doubt about that. So yes, I mean you're right. I think in terms of the you know, the basic summary. You know, what I would say, and I've got a suspicion. I mean, if I you know, I think this is where the history of the RSA probably would be interested to look at. The key date is 1846. In 1846, the government schools of design, which became the art schools, were founded. It was on the big expansion really was on the back of of what became the Royal College of Art, which became a kind of seedbed for or central mentoring organisation. But the fact of the matter is that there was a strong desire very early on from these art schools to break away from that centralised system, and they did. And some of them were no good, and there's no doubt about that. Some of them were very conservative, very dull, you wouldn't necessarily wanted to go to there, but some of them were extraordinary. And my fear is that yes, we may not have the really bad ones, but we don't really have the extraordinary ones either now, because we've lost that diversity. So I think, you know, that there are all sorts of issues around the whole question of you know, how does one control quality across the board? But I think the answer we ended up coming up with, let's stick them in the university because they have a quality control system we trust, is the wrong answer. And I think we need to be more creative as a society in how we measure educational quality. It's not just in numbers of firsts and 2-1s at the end of the day, because that's a measure of how much they have corresponded to the learning outcomes. Not an absolute measure of quality as art. And the other thing I would say, I mean, although I come from a visual art background in my interests and my studies, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is not just, you know, a visual art. You know, the music conservatoires, the independent music schools, they're under the same thing. The drama schools are under the same thing. They are going out of business. They are merging with universities. They are suddenly having to follow this basic pattern that is not really created for them. It was created a long time before anyone thought they would go into these institutions. And what's the result? You know, we now have lots of distinguished actors complaining that there's no working class children going into drama schools. Well, we've had it in the art schools for a lot longer, you know. So I think, you know, it's a much broader issue than that. The question is, what can the RSA, or what can we as the RSA, because it's a member organisation, what can we as the RSA do about it, or do to try and come up with a new situation that actually is more positive than what we've got?
Definitely.
And I don't have the answers to that, but I'd like the idea that the RSA would at least start having meetings to discuss it.
Yes.
Or then we advocate for whatever it is we think should be happening.
Exactly. Well,
so
we'll
not
definitely get
music and arts and so on from schools and universities.
Well, that seems like a very, you know, it seems like a fundamental issue, doesn't it? You haven't got people coming up from the, you know, the very starting point of that. How can you expect them to, you know, end up playing the meta?
It does seem that it's sort of draining that what you're talking about with what Michael's talking about is merely a continuation, and one wonders, well, does it all start in the Department of Education, which affects both universities and schools?
It starts before, it starts at home.
It does.
Because if your social background, if your understanding of what is a proper profession, it starts at home, because your parents will encourage you to be a doctor, whatever it might be, teacher, whatever it might be. It starts at home. If there is a love and a passion and appreciation for art, for creativity, that's infused. Personally, that's why I'm where I am. My mum played a lot of music. We had a lot of vinyl. Music was our lives. We watched a lot of musical films. We enjoyed theatre, and I was encouraged in that journey. when you are encouraged in that journey, then you feel that you can do it. My mum said it's a very hard career. I worked in theatre first of all. Very hard career to choose all of this. I said, but yeah, but it's what I love and it's what I want to do. So you were encouraged. If parents don't see being an artist as a, you know, the industry to be a part of, or to, you know, that you don't earn enough money, or you don't earn this, or you don't have a quality of life, if they don't encourage their children to see it as a pathway, if that's what they want, then the seed is already sown against it. So if in school now, when you're putting your 11-year-old into secondary school, and the subject choice in order for you to progress and tick all the boxes excludes the arts as one of the main subjects, and what some schools are doing, if you want to choose the arts, they're pocketed in to the options that you have to do that are compulsory. So you need to do your free sciences, you need ancient or modern language, technology, English, maths. So if there's no room for a child to choose, and especially if we're thinking about not just the brightest child in a state school, but those who are maybe struggling, who might only be choosing the minimal number of GCSEs, and therefore will be doing the minimum number, and there's no room to choose art, drama, dance, music, if it's on the curriculum of that school, then we're already depleting the future of our industries.
Can I provide a completely counter argument as an artist from my own personal experience? So I was part state, part privately, part religious educated. So I had a complete mishmash of kind of doing one of everything type thing. I hated art at school. I was rubbish at it. I was not an artist. I sat in my classes and I worked hard and I just got on with it because resisting seemed like a bad idea. Teachers didn't like it. At the age of 20, I became out of nowhere an artist. I don't know how it happened. I just started drawing. It was flowing out of me. I went crazy with it and I fell in love with it. And on reflection, I had a couple of experiences when I was younger that makes me know now that I adored it. You know, I had a one painting experience on holiday where someone showed me how to paint a landscape, and I was just, it's like magic to me. And so my artistic love did not come from school at all, and has been entirely punk to education. And in fact, it's very well known in the art world that art A-level, sorry to say this, is a bit of a, it's not really an art thing because it's always followed some evaluation criteria. And the Chapman brothers themselves went as a joke and took art A-level, and I think they got B and C or something. So, and they are some of the, you know, the highest paid and some of the most esteemed artists in the country.
But I think that's sort of, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, but you know, it can come at any age, and it does have a sort of mystery to it. And I think that is that mystery that is missing from all of the systems we seem to have set up for arts in plural education. But if your situation is at home, you haven't got a family background that's into music or writing or visual art, if you then have that at school, at primary school, and then you have that at secondary school, and then the decent universities, the ones we are told are the decent universities, they don't even teach art because it is a retreating subject in higher education.
That's
everything.
I would agree with you.
So whatever stage you are at,
yes,
there should be a chance to embrace this cultural, critical, creative environment.
Yes, I think when it does appear, that if there is that, I mean, the fact that when my creativity did appear, the fact that I could then go to art institutions and have the doors open did make a huge difference because, I think the doors being open is really the critical.
It's a different case for everybody. So I failed music at school. My music teacher, we didn't get on. I did do art. I did do A-level art and photography and design. Those were the things that inspired me in English literature and theatre. Those were the things that helped me to achieve what was in my O-levels at the end of the day. Everybody, your seeds were sown. Whether you liked it or not in school, the seeds were actually sown because you had the opportunity.
Yes.
And then when you could have choice, naturally, the lovely on a holiday landscape paintings re-triggered those memories and the art that you had learned. Everybody's going to learn maybe outside of school. Inside of school, I think you need, go back to what I said before, we all learn in different ways. And perhaps in your particular school, the way in which they taught, so in my school, the way they taught music didn't fire me up.
Yeah.
I failed my O-level music and in the same year, passed my RSA music at the Conservatoire in Blackheath.
Wow.
How does that happen? Because it's who's in front of you. How do they inspire you?
Yes.
What journey do they
Yes.
take you on?
Yes.
And
mentoring.
absolutely,
Yes.
and yet still on all the other stuff. I had great mentors in my art teacher. I had great mentors. My drama teacher. I became a drama teacher. I covered for my drama teacher because the way in which they worked and offered. So it's not. And I went to a very small Church of England school, not private, but small independent little Church of England school that the head teacher actually knew everybody's names. I used to always be amazed by Mrs. Kirby. You could remember everybody's name. That's just lovely because it makes it more personal, and it means that you're important when you're a child, and teachers know who you are. It's not just for telling you off; it's for your good stuff as well. That makes it really, really important. So art depends. Sometimes you'll find out. I work with a lot of young people who don't do music in school, but they do music where we are.
Yeah.
And it's just the teaching approach. It's the teaching methodology. It's going to sync with some and not with others.
What you've been talking about is really important in terms of the professions. So encouraging people to feel that they can go into them, that they enjoy them, that they've got good mentors, teachers, whatever. And that's obviously extremely important and something we would want to encourage. There's the other side of it too, which is that it increases your quality of life even if you don't go into the profession.
Absolutely.
Listening to music, going to concerts, you're the consumer as well.
Yes.
And you're going to need consumers if people are going to be able to subsist in the profession. So from all points of view, and from looking at life in a different way, being softer, being more intelligent about what's going on in life, and not seeing it as only money, for example, or being anti-particular kinds of people, or anti-countries of certain kinds, or beliefs, or whatever it is. So to remove that aspect of life is a really fundamental thing that we should fight against.
I'd like to bring in here actually an art school which has been opened, which has a very individual voice. I mentioned the Prince's School of Traditional Art. And what I think is great about this, Prince Charles opened it specifically to encourage traditional art so they don't vanish from civilizations and cultures which are in political, economic, financial turmoil. And so, Persian miniature painting, which is exquisite and gives such pride to the country. I see, just to put in there, that actually there is a political aspect to the pride of a nation being able to produce gorgeous stuff. And obviously we're talking about visual in the main, but to be able to have a production of dance and music, a theatre, sculpture, does give a nation a great deal. And the other point I'd like to make about Afghanistan, of course, is that for many years there was only one cave in Afghanistan, maybe you can help me out, where lapis lazuli was taken from, which was then brought across to Europe to produce most of the best of our, you know, still is. We do have a few more caves, obviously, these days around the world. Mined more lapis, but it is obviously a great source, and also obviously for that country a huge sense of pride of that original trade, which I think is fantastic. But I think what we're starting to come towards here as a kind of conversation is that an open door, that when people are ready, and people love the arts far more, I think, than I mean, if you say to somebody, would you like to do an IT degree or an animation degree, I think generally people love the arts. There is a passion for it, but as you're saying, is there a career there? That can be an issue. However, the important part is what else can it become in terms of value add. So in my case, when I needed to make money, I suddenly realised that I've got a very entrepreneurial streak, being an artist, and actually I'm great at taking dilapidated properties and thinking outside of the box, and therefore creating homes and houses and commercial developments for areas, which is another version of creativity. And there are artists who do that full time. A set of artists won the Turner Prize on that basis of going into homes, redecorating, regenerating. It is also from that entrepreneurial punk, throwing it all up, having an open-ended conversation mindset, which I think is fantastic. I think it's having those open doors which is essential, which therefore means that people are sitting behind the open doors, ready to have a voice, to mentor, to guide and assist at those moments.
I want to just chime in on what you were speaking of, and I've heard it said, the word of possibility and the thing of opening the doors. And I think if everyone thinks of themselves as an artist in their own right, in whatever profession they're doing, you know, that was a life-saving sentiment for me, because the kind of, I was interested in transpersonal psychology and consciousness, which was completely deemed irrelevant by a lot of the world, you know, unless you've suffered from existential crisis, anxiety, depression, or your husband has cancer, or whatever, unless it's a last resort. I often think of those things as you have to have a big trauma to come to appreciate those things, or art, or just it's kind of irrelevant until that point, largely. So I started weaving it into my everyday work, because the narrative was possible of, you can live as an artist just in your more ordinary things. So tutoring children, taking them on pilgrimages to let them experience the sacredness of things during their homework. So I could still make a living with doing English tutoring or careers counseling, but it's through these different artistic routes. So once that became possible, I felt like I was relevant in the world, and that really boosted my well-being and meaning for life, that was a possibility. And also educational institutions, I've also seen they are opening the possibilities. I recently did a master's in psychology, which was completely into take this as a risk. This is art. It was completely out of the box, and there was really professors who were going that extra mile. So I think just tying it back to the RSA, if they also have this kind of bit more risky, uncertain approach of that open the door of come in here, you know, you can still be all RSA with your fancy jacket and your intellectual discussions, and you know, that's all very good and valid and valuable, but also you can have this artistic spirit, because what I'm just saying with my age, with the millennials, people are really waking up to what a bad existential bargain it is to be alive in a lot of senses, and you see this in depression, anxiety, you know, sort of mental health of people coming up, especially in kind of their 20s, and it's quite staggering. So, I mean, art is a lifesaver for that. Moments of, I was doing a thing in a school the other day. It was a self-leadership, because that's valuable if you have leadership skills. So we do self-leadership, but in that we're actually, it's kind of a Trojan horse for letting people be more connected to what it is to be alive. And we did all these things, these exercises, these blah, 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 blah. And then right at the end, one of the girls came and played the piano. And the transformational moment, the whole day was worth it, just because of this girl playing the piano at the end. And how can you value that? You know, all the evaluation sheets will talk about the stuff during the day, but what happened in the room when their friend was playing this piano, the quietest girl, she didn't say anything in my class the whole day, and then is able to express herself and bring life alive again. And that's just what life is missing. There's no life in life, and there's no life without art, in my opinion.
You're saying, yeah, for the transformational, yes, to have that,
it's
to
invaluable.
have that hope.
That's why you can't measure it, because it's invaluable.
And intangible, yes.
Yeah.
But is that pointing towards something that is very much relevant now, which could go in two directions? I mean, one is, we talked about the idea that the RSA building itself needs to embrace the creativity of art. Perhaps it's not simply a room where there is paintings on the walls. You know, nicer that is, you know, there are plenty of places like that in London already. It's a creative space which is itself open-ended. So dictating what happens in there is not actually relevant to what the nature of that space is. It could be an exhibition of paintings, it could be an impromptu performance, it could be a discussion, you know, that can be a creative thing itself, etc., etc. So that seems to me, you know, one way you can take this. But the other is perhaps you know, far more, if you like, guided, which is, you know, if that's a very positive experience that you're describing, that would be relevant. And I have done, you know, not workshops, but I've done lectures which have sort of morphed into suddenly performance sessions where everybody's involved. You know, maybe it's actually almost workshop space that's available to bring in school teachers who are not teaching art and are in institutions where art may be marginalised, music may be marginalised, but maybe, you know, how do you get a geography teacher to embrace a performative element of teaching geography? Well, you can't just expect them to do it, of course. You know, they've not been trained in any of that. But maybe the RSA space could be a training ground for things like that.
It's fusion.
So
training teachers to be artists, or artistic in their
be
way of
artistic. I
delivering.
don't think I'd say they're artists. I say that, you know, an artistic approach to geography, an artistic approach to, or creative. Maybe the word artistic is too loaded. A creative approach to history, a creative approach to, you know, mathematics. That's not just sitting there, you know, wonderful, you know, audio-visual equipment they no doubt have in schools. But it may be incredibly physical. It may be about what you're saying, these things. If you look at, for example, you look at, you know, original mathematical modelling, it was done with models. That's why we call it modelling. They were physical objects that you explored mathematical concepts. Well, who was influenced by that? None other than Barbara Hepworth and Mount Gabber. And their sculptures come directly out of it. They tell us they come out of that. So maybe that's a route into mathematics through creativity.
Yeah.
But you need to train people to do that. Maybe the RSA has a training space, which goes back to one of its roots. You know, the RSA validation board was because it was a training organisation at one time.
I like that harsh distinction, though. I know you're pulling back from it to say to redefine the concept of the artist. I know lots of people in the music industry have done that already, themselves as artists, but to redefine it as someone who just embodies a version of sort of creativity and hope in their methodology, and therefore the geography teacher becoming the artist creates that shift in mindset, which is quite stark. And like you're saying about the difference between the person running to tick boxes and end up with a 2-1-2-2, you know, first criteria, as opposed to the artist going for the open-ended conversation. Is that too painful that there's nothing, that there will end up being a final moment?
I don't see why there would be a final moment. In my writing, there isn't a final moment. Every book I write is a prelude to the next book. It's
Yes.
not a thing in
Yes.
itself.
So actually just creating it as open-ended so that it's...
Well, there's one work of art.
For the-
In your
for the
life, you
prelude.
create one work of art. It's
Yes.
just you have these pauses to reflect. That's how I see it.
Yes.
The final moment
It's
is
true.
death.
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Blunt, just say it how it is.
I have to bring this into the conversation.
But only
At that point.
death of only the immateriality of the individual. However, they have then left legacy behind, which
That's not the end.
yeah, it's not the end, I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
But they leave their process behind, and then other people work off their process.
Exactly.
But if more people were aware of death, they would be better at their process, I believe.
Another topic.
Why? Why would they be?
They would take more risks and not be as worried about the outcome of today. They would have a different timeline on their endeavours.
You don't think they'd be sitting there frightened because they were going to die and that would paralyse them?
Yeah, I think there's
But
possibilities.
there's contemplations that can go with that, the preciousness of life. It's living well to die well.
Great. So we're on to part 2 now, having a bit of a break. What we're going to do at this point is actually try and consider a vision and hopefully some practical suggestions for the RSA, and how we would like to see the establishment move forward in the future. I think what we'll do is, because some of us are short of time, we'll divert over to those that are short of time, and then move across. So, Chris, would you like to? Have you got any practical or
thoughts about the RSA for
yeah,
a
exactly.
non-RSA person? Yeah. So 2 thoughts, I suppose, and 1 miniature challenge. My thoughts would be whether the RSA could focus on art that's not yet recognised as art by the contemporary art world. That's just from a very personal experience working on the Burning Man art project and being told repeatedly that we're not art until you are art, because you went to the right art school or whatever it was. So I wonder if, and that links in with another thought, my challenge, which is to ask all of us whether lots of the things that we seem to think we want the RSA to do may be being done to a certain extent elsewhere. That's my instinct. It's not to defend the RSA against those things, but it's whether some of those things have been done elsewhere. And if that is the case, then maybe the role of the RSA would be to focus on stuff that's outside of art or not yet been blessed by the contemporary art world. My second thought was just about, I guess, my world, finance world, and working more closely with the world of the arts. And a lot of good stuff is being done in that respect by NESTA, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, and all sorts of organisations, arts councils and so on. There's always lots of good stuff on business skills for arts people, but again, maybe that would be part of my vision for the RSA. That's it, I think.
Brilliant, thank you very, very much. What I'd like to actually start talking about is a sort of broader vision of how I personally would like to see the RSA. Elizabeth, in a way, so that when you walk in as a new member, that you get that experience, exactly the experience that you're after. My vision would be that the RSA is genuinely involved in a proper art conversation, they have at the moment two strands called Artists Network and there's a Performing Artists Network, neither of which are really empowered to move forward because they are stuck in impact criteria for the things that they are developing. I think if there was a much broader concept where there was a flourishing of creativity and so therefore in the halls, in the areas and wherever possible that the rooms can be used for exhibitions, for 2D work, 3D work, for performances, for music, and absolutely broaden the whole conversation, inclusive also outsider art. That is, there's some politics in there. Yeah, and including outsider arts, and there is a bit of a politics because outsider artists cry that they're not part of the art world, but actually when you scrape beneath the surface, they don't want to be either. They are a very flourishing world just of themselves, which, and I know this because I've tried to get into the outsider world as a trained artist, and I haven't been allowed in, just because of that. So there is quite a kind of sharp distinction that they both sit in their little units. However, including outsider art into a programme of events, and I loved your vision of the great exhibition of 18 something or other, that actually that broadened it out considerably, where the RSA takes a really vital role. And I think where the RSA would be unique is that you are putting art inside a socio-cultural, political environment where the arts can be discussed very, very deeply from the perspective of evaluation, of universities, of school, of the role of the teaching staff and how they impact. I think that's where it would make a huge difference in terms of policy moving forward and a greater, broader understanding. Because none of the arts institutions themselves are having those conversations, oddly. Why? This conversation is almost unique in the arts world. In pockets, maybe hidden pockets in the Arts Council, in the background of things, but to actually have a broader arts conversation, I can't think that I could go to the Tate and listen to, arts policy of Britain, or international arts policy, or why are the Saudis spending billions on art now that their oil is running out? Things on that take on a political ethos. So that would be my vision, that as you, Elizabeth, would walk in, you would be cascaded with a cultural enthusiasm, whilst at the same time realising that the person managing that enthusiasm would not destroy the building or ruin anything, but that you would genuinely feel that was part of, that it would be. I think they have an educational element, a social element that's very sort of specific and innovative, and in that innovative element, art, proper art, would properly be included. I'd like to see a genuine officer, happy to do it, who would create all these events, draw in different cultural institutions. I'd love to see an integration of cultural institutions as well, which also is oddly just does not happen. The Royal College of Art, invite them in, along with the Warburg Institute, along with the Arts Council, along with the kids in Lewisham, or the guy in Peckham doing nail painting and bringing out a whole revolution in everybody getting their nails painted is for peace. Bring it all together. Have a fantastic melting pot, an exciting place from an institution that has got the kudos that when you go back into the careers, you go, well, these guys are doing it, so what about the other people? I think that's really what I would love to see there, and I could see that easily as well. Not that it would be much of an effort.
You could see that easily because you could see doing it, or you could see it easily because you think the RSA would welcome it and back it.
Maybe they've never been offered a vision of it, apart from in 1850.
49.
49?
Well, yes, it'd be about that to get the great exhibition over and run. But I mean, that of course had quite heavy weight to our patronage as well. I think.
I'm sure we could get that. If the RSA were to back it, I'm sure royal patronage could be sought, because I know that Princess Eugenie is very involved in the arts. She works for Hainsworth, amongst other stuff that she does. Prince Charles, as I've already mentioned, has his own art college on the go, plus the Prince's Trust, which has been...
He's got his Children Arts Foundation as well, so it will be incorporated.
So that's enough. A couple of royals, be fantastic, amazing.
It sounds a bit, well, it sounds exciting, and obviously would fulfill a need, but it would be for those at the RSA, insofar as you've taken your vision. And I think, reverting back to what we said earlier, it would be really good to have advocacy arising out of that and lobbying, so that the rest of the world, as it were, got the advantages too, with the continuing of arts in education from schools onwards. So I think that's fundamental. And it would be a bit self-indulgent if we just said, okay, it's for RSA people.
No, I wouldn't say it was just for RSA people. In fact, given the schools programme that they are involved in, that would be an extraordinary showcase for school children who have done writing and painting alongside situations to actually create, here you are, here's a day of school kids, and turn it into something. Non-events repeatedly.
So it sounds as if people are supportive of your vision, and the next step is for you perhaps to agree to draft the concept to be presented to the
This is
RSA.
the concept.
It has
Right
to be written.
here, right now.
Yeah, it has to be written.
We can write it.
And then presented and discussed and taken forward.
I also wonder about collaborations, you know, like with the Welcome collection. If
Quite.
Sorry?
Yeah, exactly.
If like RSA were to partner with them and showcase some of their work, and you know, as you said, those who are already doing the more artistic conversations, just having them in the house a little bit more, just having their feeling there.
Absolutely.
And I know in Bermondsey Street there's this lovely exhibition by Olympus Cameras, sponsors all sorts of art exhibitions weekly with weekly turnarounds. So I think, yeah, if they could maybe just invite that possibility of collaboration would be useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess my vision, I agree with the debate, the discussion, the future of arts and creative industries, and the RSA playing a key role in what's happening within education. And have we had a voice from the RSA? I don't know if they signed up to the EBAC or the Back for the Future campaign, and its role and whatever kind of patronage. You know, Prince Charles does have his Arts and Children's Foundation. How does that connect? They've been doing some amazing art work on that particular project and programme. It's about, at the centre of a space like the Royal Society of Arts, as a new member, this is one of the first things I've come to as a new member. Wow. I read the blog, I read lots of stuff, I'm busy, but this you inspired me. You inspired me through your art, so I'm into everything about what you're painting and auras and aura pure. It was very interesting to me, just as somebody who loves art. But you inspired me in the sense that it touched me enough that I would give you my Sunday afternoon,
Yes.
and I would come and see your exhibition as you launch this on Tuesday, and talk about it with my clients as well. And one of my clients who did art says, I've heard of Degard, and I was like, oh, I'm going to her opening tonight. You know, it was all of that. And that to me, as somebody who loves creativity, from art to music to dance to theatre to film, I haven't been inspired enough yet, obviously, from everything that I've been reading in the blogs and the newsletters, to make me go, I'll set aside time there. I want to be at that. Sometimes we can talk, and I'm a woman of action, and I want to make sure that in a decade's time, 2 decades' time, that creativity is still central to our being.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I like the ideas that we were talking about before, about the workshop space, some cross collaboration.
Yeah.
I like the idea of why aren't schools, you know, why don't we get not just from primary, secondary, but maybe university
Yeah.
Students into the RSA,
Yeah.
having a space and having a feel.
Yeah.
They write to you saying, you know, do you want to nominate anybody to be a fellow?
Yeah.
But actually the best way to get more fellows is actually to seed it and to grow it.
Yes.
So that actually all of those graduates after their art degree or whatever that they're doing
Would want to be
go,
part of
I
it.
want to be a part of the
Yes.
RSA
Yes,
because
that's
I
right.
went there and I exhibited or I took part in something and it was a part of me, and to me that's involving the younger generation is crucial to growth and longevity.
I think you bring up an absolutely critical point about that if the RSA said to this conversation, yes, okay, we'll have an arts officer and we'll have an event programme, and that's a brilliant idea, well done you guys. To actually do it with the mindset of creativity, that open-ended possibility, as opposed to what they're currently doing, which is a very closed, how can we create, I can't remember exactly the thing that they've done, but to create something which has got an obvious impact benefit, which is not the arts at all. However, as you say, there's a long-term role of seeding and also of just bringing about very fascinating aspects of society, a place where you could put a teacher, a primary teacher and a secondary teacher, a university lecturer and somebody, you know, more senior up in a university process, and somebody from the government, having that roundtable discussion openly would be fascinating and probably unique, oddly, because you think that that would be obvious to do, but simply doesn't happen. Or as you were saying, sort of the co-joining of disciplines, which Imperial has managed to
Well, it's still controversial in Imperial. It's not a done deal. I mean, I think I would. You know, I think the idea of you know, a meeting space for the great and the good to do good is actually quite an important thing for the RSA. The RSA is in a unique position in terms of its role as advocate. The notion of this retreat of art that I've talked about being stemmed, well, there are lots of people actually talking about that being a problem, and in the art world, in the theatre world, in music. But it doesn't seem to have this muscular thrust behind it. It's saying, well, what do we do to stop that? To recognise that there is a problem in the first place, that there comes a point when this thing stops being self-regenerating if you are not, feeding the roots of this thing. So I think the RSA is in a position to invite the people who, I think that's the first thing it should do. There should be an almost emergency conference organised by the RSA to say, how do we stop the crisis that is about to hit us in the arts in this country? Start to be proactive. You know, don't assume it'll be all right, because once it's not all right, it's too late.
Yes.
We've got a real problem.
Yes.
So I think that would be my first thing I would advocate for them to do. I think the idea of integrating art into other subjects, it's got space, well, that's what you really need. It's got contacts, that's important. I mean, just talking about that history of the relationship of the Royal Academy, I mean, an idea just struck me which may be absolutely ridiculous, but how about a Royal Academy style summer show for children? A summer art show where you are literally inviting children across the country to send their work in. We don't hold it at the Royal Academy, we hold it at the Royal Society of Arts. So that there is this annual event which associates in the minds of teachers, of parents, of young people, the RSA with them and what they do. I mean, events like that would be, you know, you can imagine something
Very
like that would be,
powerful.
exactly,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So we don't have to, you know, we don't have to think of professional artists, but they are obviously part of this conversation because they often do get left out, as we've often discussed today. But we can bring in other people who are not professional artists. They are children. They are
Absolutely.
teachers of geography and so on.
Absolutely.
So I think you know, all of those things you know, are good ideas. You know, you say one thing that you know, I mean, it hadn't occurred to me before, but you are absolutely spot on. The first thing I went to at the RSA was a book prize giving, a series of talks associated with I think it was the History Book of the Year award. So it is creative cultural events that bring people in. So it's an obvious thing, isn't it? Why is there not a weekly, a fortnightly, a monthly lecture program of interesting people in the cultural world, just to get people in, because that will get other people from broader society and the cultural world in the door, many of whom you will want as other fellows. It's not. I've done that in upstairs rooms in pubs in Leeds. It's not that difficult to do. And you know, you're right. These things don't necessarily have to take a lot of money, a lot of effort. They can be, if you give somebody the space. You know, quite often they can just do it.
And with a membership of 29,000 and the ability to boot them all an email pretty quickly, it doesn't take much to fill a room, and paying for tickets and things. Yeah, fully agree. Jen, has anyone got any other suggestions to sort of finally?
Yeah, I just think it's maybe RSA is doing a lot of this stuff, but maybe the image they're portraying isn't selling the events with this, because I've been going to quite a few of their lunchtime events this year, and they are focused around the topics of design and education and those more social change subjects, but within it the speaker always brings that artistic spirit with them. You know, all the speakers have got that that inspiring quality, which I don't know if is necessarily painted in their image, because it's got that whole I don't know, there's something around the maybe it's the traditional sort of place it's coming from. Maybe if it could just I don't know,
Lighten up.
lighten. Yeah, and I think they're trying to do that with the new coffee house. They are sort of going for a re-imaging, so there's a lot of space as well with kind of the restructuring of the building for this to come into play. But yeah, there are some very alternative views going on in these lunchtime topics. So if they could just sort of heighten, like amplify the artistic part of all of this.
Yeah, lunchtime, you know, I work in South East London.
Yeah.
I won't be coming up for lunchtime topics and meetings, you know, or the evening stuff starts precisely at 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Having to go into London, if I'm going to have to drive into London, I live in Kent. Anything before 6 o'clock, no, because it's congestion charge, blah. There's all these things that block you from participating. And you know, I've read a few things. The presentation of what they do, and I'm still getting to grips with, you know, 1 year, I'm still reading stuff and trying to understand all the different aspects, and there's a lot going on. Creativity, you know, Royal Society of Arts, if you say it, I do expect more creative collaboration that may be a lot more exciting festivals or other things rather than the discussion. As I said, really, you know, it's great to discuss stuff. I'm the woman of words, but I'd like the collaboration, the fusion of different people in events and those opportunities.
Well, also, I think I mean, you're absolutely right. Those, you know, I've seen the design, our designers going in, and inspirational teachers and entrepreneurs going in. But I really would just like to hear interesting artists talk about their work without any kind of what's the word, agenda behind it, that this needs to therefore have some relationship to something else. I would just like to hear them speak, you know, about their music, about their visual art, about their, you know, their poetry or whatever. Poetry readings, for example. You know, it seems to me that these are what are missing. It's not in a way you're right. It's not necessarily the discussion of art. It's the discussion of art in relation to society that seems to be a problem, as we've discussed. But it's the art itself, and whether that's paintings on the wall, sculptures on the floor, poets reading, musicians performing, or them just talking about their creativity. You know, I mean, in a sense, you know, it's what they do on the weekend or on every other show on Radio 6. It seems to me that that's what should happen in person at the RSA.
Yes. And I think what you're saying about the RSA is exactly why we're having this conversation about the RSA, because there's so much potential seeping through which isn't then exploded out to create something that is vibrant as a culture. And we're not sitting here having a conversation, for example, about the Royal Society and saying, well, the Royal Society should break down its walls and have artists in there. No, you know, I'm not going to go there. There's no chance. We're having a conversation about the Royal Society of Arts, and we're not also having a conversation with the Royal Academy and saying to the Royal Academy, you need to be a much more political beast. Far from it. You know, that would be a frightening proposition. You know, I wouldn't go up to Charles Suarez Smith, who's just put up this new building, as you say, another extension, and say, Charles, let's talk economics and politics and social policy, because I don't think it's the right institution. I don't think that's what they're aiming at. But the Royal Society of Arts, as this, with its origins in making Britain great, I think it's the perfect place, and I think that's why we're all here struggling away for it, because it has got all of that seeping potential which we've all wanted and yearned for, but isn't quite there.
And the title's also, it's the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, and I think that encouragement is a really important word because it has the heart in it. It's got that facilitating the process of the heart. So it's just like trying to get that heartbeat a bit more visible. Maybe it's alive, but more publicly visible, however that's done. And I like the suggestion of more things without a particular agenda around this has to be written in this policy report. It's just, as you say, just for the joy of hearing about a process of art. Because joy is important. Otherwise, like, look at the suicide rates. It is pretty important.
It's true. It's true. Anyone else? Final words of wisdom?
I can only go back to my point that somebody needs to write this up, because there have been some really good ideas. So maybe if you write it up as a plea to the RSA, and then we all look at it, add anything that we want to, and send a really good thing into them, saying we had this exceptional discussion on a Sunday afternoon, and we would now like a meeting with you to discuss what you're prepared to do and to ask us any questions you've got.
Yeah, and highlight anything that we've missed, because
Yes.
I'm a new member, so could be that they have this and this going on, and just haven't really picked that up. You know, you can only read so much into some of the emails and blogs and everything in time, and it might be, hey, you're just not aware of blah blah.
Yeah.
And being very encouraging to them as well, to take these ideas on board and to support them in doing so, rather than, you've never done this, why haven't we done it? We now think you should, which would be setting their teeth on edge for a
I
start.
don't think this conversation so far has really been on that level.
No, I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting it. I'm just thinking ahead on what's sent to them.
Sure, sure, great.
There's also the fellow networks to consider, like the people in your whichever borough you're staying in. They offer the option of giving you funding for a venue and doing the marketing for people to show up at your event about art or something.
What kind of support they
So,
can give.
yeah.
No, because we did talk way before we were filming just about the cost of hiring the spaces there.
Yeah.
So obviously sometimes there is dead space, there's mornings and there might be afternoon dead space and they're running their lunchtime stuff and evening stuff, but how do you create that space? Obviously it's a business, it's got to earn money, but if it's dead most of the time, I think you have to rethink how you might utilise that and maybe support members but creating more opportunities or even opening it out, as we said about schools and, you know, young people, some youth energy into the
Economics
room.
of it are actually a major issue. Because when I first joined and was shown round, I started to ask how much would it be to hire a space here. It's very sizable amounts of money to hire a space in there.
Okay.
Really sizable.
But what do you do? The spaces are already there and it's empty.
No, I agree with
Yeah.
your point, but
But
that's
no,
what
I
they might
understand.
come back with. You know, the going rate is.
Yeah.
So we would need to probably have the finance.
I'm all about that.
people
So
looking at it.
if you have a space, you know, I run a building, if you have a space, yes, you've got your higher rates and all the rest of it on one level, but if you note that there are dead times that really just aren't used at all, by creating something that might be a bit more discounted, a bit more opportunist, you fill that dead time and you're going to add to that earned income rather than have it empty.
Great stuff.
Right,
Lovely,
my request would be that
lovely.
we circulate email addresses to everybody.
course,
and we
of
can
course,
post
of
that.
course.
Thank you so much.
Well,
for
just to
organising.
say thank you ever so much, everyone. I think we're finished anyway,
Yes.
and yeah, and I hope you have enjoyed as the RSA our conversation, and we will be putting some writing too. Thank you.